there was a police-involved shooting that you were involved in, and you and I talked through it a little bit. And I don't know that many of the folks who will be watching this know about it. But if you could sort of walk us through, one, what that's like, just for an officer in general, to be in that situation, but then very specifically what it was like for you and your partner at that time.
Well, I think there's a misconception. If you watch TV, you will think that every police officer has fired their gun many times in the line of duty. And in all actuality, it's a very rare event. And for me, December 16th, 2002 was the worst day of my life. And it's something I carry with me to this day. It's something that going through this process, I knew this was going to be public. It's not something I like to talk about, but I had to sit my two sons down, 15 and 12, and for the first time I told them that story because I knew it was going to come out. And I had been dreading that conversation since they were born. And I never told them that, not because I'm ashamed, but it's a profound thing to kill a person. And nobody joins this police department or any police department to be involved in an incident like that. So it was a hard thing to have to explain to them.
I can imagine. And as you talk to them about it, what was their reaction to that?
They know I'm a police officer, so they, in an abstract way, they understand the risks that all of us take. But I think they had questions about, am I going to be shot at again? Am I going to have to use deadly force again? And I explained to them as best I could that this job requires everyone to have to prepare for that day, hoping that it will never come. So we had about an hour left in our shift, and we pulled a vehicle over for a minor traffic infraction. The vehicle pulled over very slowly, which was a little odd, but other than that, it wasn't that suspicious. As I approached the passenger side, my partner approached the driver's side. We could smell marijuana in the car. We could see open bottles of beer in the car. So we asked the driver to get out. As the driver got out, I was looking over the hood, and I could tell he was a big man. He was almost my height. I was looking at him over the hood of the car. And as my partner was trying to pat him down and give commands, he kept reaching for his waistband. That was a concern for me. And then suddenly he turned and punched my partner in the face. Now, he was wearing glasses at the time, and I'll always remember the glasses just flying off of his face. And then a foot pursuit ensues. And that is something that I'd been involved in at that time in my career probably 50, 60 times. So it was relatively not that unusual. So the suspect was running down the street, and I'm watching him, and he's not swinging his arms. He's not running like a normal person just trying to get away would be running. He's holding his waistband. So that's a red flag to me. And my partner is directly behind him. I'm to the right of my partner and maybe 10 feet behind. And all of a sudden, the suspect wheels around and starts firing. And it's muzzle flash, muzzle flash, muzzle flash, muzzle flash, pop, 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 pop. And I can tell my partner's immediately struck. His head snaps back, he flies back. We both return fire. My gun is in my hand before I even realize it. It hadn't been at the pursuit, but the training essentially just kicked in. And I see my partner out of my peripheral vision go down. So I knew he was struck in the exchange. The suspect continues running, and it seems like he either trips or he's collapsing from the gunfire exchange at that initial point. And then as he falls, and I come running up on him, this is the first time I'd actually seen the gun. Before I just saw the muzzle flashes because it was dark on the street. He brings the gun up, and it looks like I can stick my whole fist in the barrel of the gun. It seems so huge to me. And I return fire again, and then we call for an ambulance for the suspect, The first officer arrives on scene and throws my partner in his police car to take him immediately to the hospital. We notify VCU Medical Center to be ready, because in my mind, I know what I just saw happen to him. And then the entire Richmond Police Department shows up, and I'm placed in a police car, and I'm, standard practice. They take my weapon and all my gun belt, and I just kept asking someone at the scene to give me an update about my partner, because I know what I had seen, and I later learned that he had been shot in the chest and had been shot in the leg. And luckily, the bulletproof vest stopped the bullet in his chest, so he had a massive bruise there, but it didn't penetrate the vest. And luckily, his gunshot wound to his leg was not substantial. It was a flesh wound, essentially.
I've heard officers talk about, people need to understand what that's like in those, because it's seconds.
Right.
You don't have minutes to make a decision. You've got seconds to make a decision. And in those seconds, it's life or death in some ways, right? How do you take what happened that day and maybe teach it forward to new officers coming in? One, around the experience of what that felt like, but two, sort of what to look for. Because you talked about all the various things that you saw happening that were different than if he maybe didn't have a gun or a weapon.
Well, I have spoken to academy classes about the incident. And there's always two things I want to talk about: the incident itself and then its aftermath. But one of the questions that come up often from the officers, the recruits rather, is when we go through all this training, but how do you know when that situation happens that you're going to react properly? Because if you're too early and you mistakenly shoot someone that doesn't deserve to be shot, then you're going to be in trouble and ruined. And if you're too late, you're just dead. And I say you have to be proficient in your training. You have to look for the warning signs. I've had many, like every Richmond police officer, I've had many close calls, many times where I've dealt with armed suspects and not had to use deadly force. And this incident, as bad as it was in some ways, it wasn't much of a decision for me to pull the trigger that night. I liken it to being pushed out of an airplane and the decision one makes to pull the ripcord on your parachute. That's not much of a choice. You either do it and you're gonna have a chance at surviving, or you don't and you're gonna hit the ground. But what no one tells you about is the aftermath of that. So I'm not ashamed to say that I had PTSD afterwards. My wife had to help me through it. There was a lot of sleepless nights, and it's something I carry with me to this day. As I said, I get emotional when I have to bring it up again, when I had to tell my sons going through this process, and I knew it was going to be in the forefront. It's a heavy weight. And every time we have an officer go through a similar incident, it brings it back up. And in 2002, and on June 2nd, two of my first precinct officers were shot in the line of duty and had to use force as well. And they're still recovering from their gunshot wounds. And when you go through something like this, it makes you question a lot of things, but even the big picture things like your own mortality, understanding that, the difference between this and this is why I'm here today. If there had been any deviation in the aim of that weapon, then instead of my partner taking those rounds, then maybe I do. And maybe I'm hitting a place where I don't have ballistic material covering my body. So I understand how lucky I was, and as bad as it was, and as bad as I feel that my partner was shot and had to go through all of that, and as bad as I feel that I had to shoot another human being, I survived it. And that's how it makes sense to me, is I was able to survive that encounter.